Hello, I'm Rob Jones, partner at B2B Connect, and I'll be your moderator for our next discussion called Implementing a Data-Driven Procurement Strategy. This will look at the importance of data, ensuring its veracity, and how technologies such as artificial intelligence will play a role in decision-making within the industry in future. Joining me are Jason Burke, Head of Business Development for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland at SAS Global Retail and CPG, Diana Sekali, M&S Strategic Sourcing Manager EMEA for Mars, Andrew Savage, General Manager, Business Development and Operations at MTM Group, Suha El-Shabini, Regional Corporate Solutions Manager for Bureau van Dijk, and Hriday Gopal, Regional Director of Sales, MEA Region for Zycus. Diana, I'm going to start with you. I think a good place to start is maybe a brief overview of how Mars is starting to think about data differently. As you go through your strategy around data, what are the key things you're trying to achieve?
Sure, thanks a lot, Rob, and thank you for hosting me today. And hello, everybody. So, as you said, I believe data has become the fuel of our current times. And a data-driven strategy, especially in procurement, is a very important way of taking care of the categories. Being part of Mars and leading the strategic sourcing for marketing and sales, I can say that it's a very important way of looking how to assess and how to draft a strategy for my categories. In Mars, we know the importance of data to the extent that we've created within the commercial department, which is procurement for Mars, we created a cell that's fully responsible of doing data collection and analysis. And this team has actually started a pilot on specifically one big category that we have took over as a department, which is distributed services, where they're actually helping us analyze the data. Now, the importance of this team is not only that they run this kind of exercise, they've also do it globally. So I look after Middle East and Africa. However, they actually analyze this data and provide information for all the other markets. So it gives them the vision and the capacity to give us insights from outside our market. I can give you an example. We've done this kind of analysis for one of the markets where they've done two folds of analysis. They looked internally, where they provided us with information about the sales in the market, what is our cost to serve. They've conducted interviews with the stakeholders to collect information. They've extracted data from the system as well. And they made it significant. They actually analyzed it and provided a framework and they mapped the current situation for us, as well as actually they looked externally, not only internally. So they've interviewed counterparts in other companies in the market. They've conducted an RFI through the system. So they've collected information about what are the capabilities out there, how other players are doing or running this category in the market, where do we stand in terms of costing model, and what are the things that we can improve to move forward. And this enabled us to draft our from and two statements that, and we looked at, of course, the gaps. So what can we do? How can we lead this transformation as such in these markets?
So that's helping you with your decision-making then?
Of course, this is what actually provided us the basis for our decision of how to move forward. What's the way forward? Shall we run a tender? Shall we change the current business model? So definitely it's a decision-making tool.
Okay, and Andrew, I think similarly for you, a similar question, because as a telco, you have to be generating a lot of data. And so this must be giving you the opportunity to look at your business differently. Now, I know that you've brought in data scientists, so I'd like to sort of understand what they're bringing into it as well.
Yeah, that's right, Rob. So obviously, as you mentioned, as a telco, we generate massive amounts of data. Generally from our customer base, we constantly connected to the network. It's just a constant stream of data and information. But setting that aside and just looking at the sort of the procurement data, which is obviously my focus area, we're also generating an awful lot of information there. And I think from our perspective, one of the things that we wanted to do is go back to your first point, which is around making sort of fact-based decisions. And if you separate those two things out, what is a fact? A fact is something that is known to be true, and a decision is a conclusion that you reach after you've considered the facts, and then you get to a fact-based decision. And that's what we wanted to base, all of our decisions on. Procurement historically has been, I guess, an art form. People would talk about the art of procurement. And we wanted to turn that into more of a science-based approach. And there's one thing that you need to be careful of there. And, as you see with the sort of the current pandemic, people following science exactly is, in some cases, a little bit dicey. So in our case, we wanted to be guided by science and guided by the facts. It's not that everything that we're doing is providing an output which is, this is a piece of data and this is driving an exact channel or a journey. It's more about, these are putting together all of the different facts in front of us and allowing us to make decisions. So we're purely basing decisions based on facts. Our strategy was about getting our house in order first of all. So instead of sort of cleaning up the house, making sure our data was in a structured way, implemented a number of different systems and platforms to kind of get away from the Excel models and get more into people. They would go into a system on the cloud, they would input information, we get basically a clean data set. And then from an analytics perspective, that's where the data scientists come in. The type of analytics that they can do on your sort of clean data is phenomenal. An example that I talk about is our sort of decision support. We developed in-house a platform using open source technology to basically narrow down different scenarios. So in a certain circumstance, in a sourcing event, we would have a situation where we'd have millions of different scenarios, impossible to compute as a human. But by using AI, we can slice and dice that information and basically put in different parameters to get those, the number of scenarios down to sort of a handful, and then help us to make fact-based decisions based on that information. So, the data scientists are there to add that sort of leading edge. But it's, they are to guide decisions rather than, everybody looks at the data scientists to say, okay, now tell me what to do. It's more of, we're providing the right information to the buying community to allow them to make the best decisions.
So they're working with the procurement team, not replacing the procurement.
That's exactly the case. And again, people, when you talk about AI, robots in procurement, or actually in any space, people tend to say, replacing the workforce, or it's not the case at all. It's simply not happening. My team and the data scientists, we're an enablement function. So we sit kind of at the side of the procurement buying team, and we feed them with a constant stream of information to help them do their job better. It's not about replacing them at all. It's helping them to buy better, buy smarter, and also to allow them to focus on sort of strategic procurement. If we implement something like a robotic process automation, we're taking away the sort of the manual work that they would have to do, the monotonous, really manual, boring work, and allows them to, of course, then focus on the strategic angle of procurement, which is what we want. That's where the value lies.
Okay, so Suha, as companies are increasingly trying to analyze their data, and this is becoming, and it's going to get bigger and bigger, we know that this is going to become a much more important part of not just procurement, but every job. How are they starting to think about what it's telling them? How are you trying to help them understand things like risk in their supply chain?
Okay, so basically data can be overwhelming, as you mentioned, whether it's your own internal data or it's external data that you're getting from outsourced or vendors. The idea is that you need to understand what's the data that you have, and then what are the use cases that you can make out of it. And in some cases, you even need to know what regulators that you need to report to. And then looking at all these aspects, you start to create these kind of analytics and dashboards that can help you make an informed decision. And this is the key. We're going to make decisions day in and day out in business. But the point is, are you making a decision based on facts and numbers and information that you have about your own business, industry, suppliers, and so on? So it's important to make those informed decisions in different areas. And if we take supplier risk as an example, then you will need those analytics that can flag different risks to you. For example, whether it's financial risks, compliance risks, or performance risk about a specific supplier, and even in some cases, your own spend exposure when it comes to your supplier base. So putting all these factors together will give you a wider picture about the suppliers that you're dealing with, and it will help you make decisions on whether you should grant a large contract to a specific supplier, or maybe one of your suppliers is at risk, so you need to have a backup plan or a backup supplier, and so on. So it's the whole idea is to really be ready and to anticipate the risk that might come towards you, in order to make the right decision early enough before it really impacts business.
Okay, but I mean, when people talk about risk, it's kind of a scary word that kind of impacts people. How are you making sure that people, I guess, investigate that risk in an intelligent manner? Because it can be, otherwise people can overreact where they see something that maybe isn't the full story.
This is why you look at things from different perspectives. So if you have a supplier that is financially unstable, then you need to look at other aspects. You need to look at other suppliers. You just need to be ready. You need to know what are your plans going forward. And risk is there. Just the fact that you're trading, definitely there is risk. And we've seen it, like the whole world turned upside down in a few days. And the supply chain disruption has showed its huge impact on the business. So we need to understand that risk is going to happen, but the idea is, are you able to anticipate it? Are you able to assess it? Are you able to have those informed decisions that will help you mitigate it early enough? Because the further you delay, that's the real issue, the higher the impact is.
Okay, interesting. And Jason, turning to you, and you have a rich history of analyzing data as well. How are you seeing organizations change their demands toward data that they want to get insight into?
Well, I think, I mean, from our perspective and how we see it, particularly in supply chain and procurement, is that, I mean, it was mentioned before that this commodity of the data and how it's harnessed is vitally important. So, you know, from a supply chain perspective, you know, what we see quite healthily in lots of businesses, actually supply chains and procurement organizations are quite advanced in terms of the way that they think about the value of the data and how they can utilize it and how they can inject it. So I think how organizations are looking at their data, from our perspective, really looks about how quickly they can access the data, how scalable it is, how they can inject it into different processes, how they can utilize it in that decision making in logical kind of sequence methods and consistently as well. And you know, the bottom line here is everybody's working to razor sharp KPIs and razor sharp profitability numbers. And what's really shifting and changing is people understanding how that data contributes to those important business factors, which kind of can dictate the health of a business. So, you know, I think the understanding and the will to use data within supply chain and procurement, I think, has been there for a long time, but now really it's about accessibility, availability, and how you can utilize it in those different process decision-making points. And, you know, a key thing here as well is we're talking about data scientists and AI, and, you know, one of the core parts to that is utilizing the right capabilities to do the heavy lifting, to kind of supplement the art and the science together, so you get that balance right that was described before. And the other thing is how do we make the organization more data and analytics savvy? So how do we make sure that not just data scientists who are trained and capable in this methodology have access to the data and able to analyze it, but also how citizen data scientists can utilize scalable analytics in decision points. You know, what if scenarios is a really great example there that was mentioned. How can you, in every decision point, in every daily operation, how can you make that consistency and that analytical capability available at the fingertips of every person in the organization? And this then becomes a very interesting element to consider in the organization, because then you are creating more consistency to be able to translate your strategy into every single decision for every single day. And that's kind of what we see is that there's a massive shift towards kind of moving from this experimentation to this scalable production in everyday organizational steps and every decision-making step in the day-to-day operation.
Okay, and Hirade, are you seeing something similar, this kind of idea of making it more strategic and changing the way they look at data?
Thanks, Rob. So I feel that even during the pre-COVID era, data both in procurement as well as the supply chain world was very important, but now post-COVID, it has become very critical. And this has mostly emerged from companies who wanted to actually start their digital transformation journey. And the digital transformation journey has had a great correlation with business performance. And companies in the yesteryears have done a good job in terms of getting their transactional data and even now capturing their line item level details. But what was missing from most of the enterprise, which we talk to, is something which is a contextual data, which can help them to take more intelligent decisions when they're actually buying something. I'll give you an example. So let's imagine if I'm a requisitioner, when I'm going to maybe raise a buying decision, I would want to have both internal information, which could be helping me to take a well-informed decision, as well as some information coming in from the market. So if I have that information on my fingertips, it would be easier for me to take a more informed decision, which will ultimately contribute to the business objective. So that has been the way in which companies have started to look into. They have started utilizing and understanding the importance of data. When we talk to multiple different potential customers, they also tell us that we would want to have market intelligence coming in from different eras of the world. So for example, they would want to know if there are different kind of risks which exist in the world. So for example, if there are any kind of a natural risk similar to what the pandemic did to the entire corporate world. It could be maybe a financial risk, which maybe one of their suppliers is going through. It could be maybe a layoff. It could be maybe a credit rating related issue. It could be maybe a geopolitical risk. For example, maybe with US and the cross-border trade deal with China, how does that affect all the different suppliers? It could be also maybe some kind of a operational risk. It could be maybe a planned shutdown due to pandemic. So there's a huge increase in terms of getting all that data captured from different facets of the corporate world, so that one, we could profile the suppliers and our stakeholders better, so that we could take more informed decisions. So that has been one of the areas in which most of the enterprise are actually looking into. The second is,
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, the second is obviously optimizing your price as well as efficiency metrics. So you would want to see that how are your peers benchmarking when they're actually buying a particular commodity. So if I'm buying it at X, if my other peer groups are buying it may be less than X, how do I actually increase my efficiency and how do I actually increase my total supply base so that I'll be in a better position to maybe match that industry standard. So those are the kind of initial trends which we have seen when it comes to adopting artificial intelligence as well as crunching supply chain data and making sense out of it.
Okay, and we'll be covering actually artificial intelligence in a little bit. I should just say to everybody that Hridaye's camera stopped working just before we were about to go live, which is why you can't see him on your screen. Jason, now I think every company likes to think that their data insights are going to give them that competitive edge. From your experience, do you think that companies have that clear understanding of what they're trying to achieve before they start planning their data use, what sort of meaningful insights they want to get, and how it's going to shape their attitudes towards procurement or supply chain?
I mean, I think seeing the market from the perspective that I have coming from retail into technology is I think there is a broad range of approaches from different businesses, you know, and we'll probably talk about this method over and over, but this is really about the maturity of the business and their understanding about how the analytics and the data fits into that kind of strategic direction. So I think our job, certainly from our perspective in SaaS, is that we need to understand what level of maturity a business is at for us to help them to isolate what it is that's going to make a difference using analytics. You know, I think you kind of range from small businesses who are trying to make sense of their data, who are trying to strategize but don't really know how to approach it, so we can help them from that perspective, right down to the other end of the scale where you have a highly driven data-led organization, and you know, where we see that happening, that is led from the top, and there is a clear strategy from top to bottom about how the data and the analytics plays a part in that. And if that, as an example, if we take that as an example, what that then does is it gives people much more autonomy then to create data and analytical driven strategies that feed into the overall business strategy. So, you know, I think the ability to kind of shift around different businesses' kind of maturity status is key for us in terms of analytics. And there are lots of methods that you can apply. You can create data labs, for instance. But the critical part, and most people are talking about here, is how quickly you get to the insights to productionize it and actually utilize it in the business so that it delivers results. And doing that dynamically at scale and being able people to collaborate with that data is key to that as well.
Okay, now interesting that you have talked about the speed with which you need to start getting to that data. And Diana, we've talked about using the data to help aid decision making, but you also need to think about, can that data be trusted? Is it unbiased? Is it credible? What sort of steps do you go through to make sure that everybody believes in the data?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's very important to know that what we're basing our decision on is actually data that's true and verified, like you said. The first and foremost is actually verifying where we're getting the data, so the source of information. What we're trying to do is to ensure we have the right systems in place. So when we're talking about an internal analysis or an internal assessment, so the source of data has to be and the system that is actually a one system that's utilized across the organization, that the input, so whatever we input into the system is actually also verified and controlled and follows the right governance work stream and processes. So once we extract this information, what we do is when we drafted, for example, a report out of it, we actually share it with the right stakeholders and we verify it again. So we ensure that everybody's aligned, that this is the right data to use as a basis for our decision making. Now, when you're talking about external benchmarking, we have different ways of analyzing and verifying the data. So once we collect information externally, we use third-party services such as Bureau Van Dijk and others that are similar in the market to verify for example, if we're talking financial assessment, we verify that the financials that we're getting are true, that they are correct using these kinds of services. We also use a third party for external benchmarkings around, the costs that are out there in the market, what are the costing models, who are the players that the competition or any other, similar companies are using, as well as we actually do reference checks. So we ourselves conduct interviews, whether it's by phone or by using a system where we collect and ensure that the information that we got is actually true.
Now, Andrew, I think Jason made a point actually, which made me think of something you've said to me, which is, again, he was talking about how you need to be able to analyze it better and get deeper. Also, you've said you don't use Excel anymore. It's just not how you base your decisions anymore. So I guess a similar question to the one I asked Diana, but in terms of verifying the data, also, you need to start thinking about when you start applying new technologies like AI. How are you accounting for this?
Yeah, first of all, we are not fortunate enough to have gone completely away from Excel. We do rely on it. We just have less of a reliance on Excel. But yeah, you're right in terms of it's right from the start when people in your organization they have to have a view of how important the data is, and ultimately that flows through into where you apply things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, and getting that sort of entry level data in good shape is the best way to to ensure that the outcome is much more stable. But in terms of actually sort of viewing the data when it comes to AI, it's just about being aware of what that information is. There's always going to be outliers in information. There's always going to be sort of data that you're capturing, which is perhaps it's not always relevant, but it's still realistic. It's still an actual data point that you've got, and ultimately it's a statistical estimate at the end of the day. So when confidence interval. And that's something that gets kind of lost, and it's a bit problematic these days in that everyone expects AI to be the silver bullet, and it just simply isn't. It's just about providing sort of that overview and a bit more sort of, let's say, laser guided guidance. But it isn't the silver bullet at all. So you do need to be a little bit careful with it. But yeah, I mean, the other points are exactly right in terms of that sort of the setup of the data and making sure that people are buying into the fact that this is what you're doing and this is how you get the end result.
So Suha, I mean, if AI is not a silver bullet, what should organizations consider as they start to embrace these sort of technologies, AI and machine learning, because it's going to happen more and more?
Yeah. So as Andrew mentioned earlier, is that the computing of this amount of data is not something that we can do in our day-to-day. And that's the whole purpose of the AI and machine learning. So I always start by asking this question: how much resources would you need to monitor your, let's say, 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 supplier base? So imagine the time and resources required to monitor them, whether internally or externally, to monitor their financials, their news, adverse media, compliance issues. How much resources would you require? So today, there are tools and scores based on AI and machine learning that are designed to help us track this kind of data and information. It is not the silver point for sure, but it is a tool. It's one of the tools that we use to understand aspects that we don't have quick access to. So for example, one of the scores that we've worked on, which is a sentiment score, what it does is finds your supplier in the news providers and articles and looks for negative news and adverse media about the supplier. And then it tells you if you need to be concerned about the supplier or not, based on the amount of negative data or negative news that we found. So in general, AI and machine learning were developed to help us save time and help us save resources. And it will definitely give you access to different aspects that can add value to your process and to your decision making.
Hriday, can I ask you the same question as well? Are you seeing a change in approach from customers in terms of when they're looking at how this can help them? Are they thinking about things like AI, machine learning, or any other sort of technology?
Correct. I think the idea is simple but powerful. So we think that there are a lot of companies who are trying to leverage artificial intelligence in different ways. For example, I would also want to talk about maybe how community intelligence is coming into picture when it comes to peer group benchmarking or maybe best-in-class benchmarking. So as a technology provider, we keep the game very simple. We would want to leverage our existing community intelligence and help all our users to make intelligent decisions. And as a vendor, we would also want to add maybe a layer of artificial intelligence wherein we can actually give them an additional point of view or perspective when somebody is going about maybe buying a particular commodity. I'll give you an example. For example, I'm an approver, and some of my approvals have been delayed by maybe a couple of hours or maybe a few days, because of which there are certain holdup within the sourcing process as well as the buying process. But because I'm not benchmarking it with any of the other peer groups, I'm not able to get that actionable intel that, you know what, I need to act faster so that I could approve my requisitions on time so that the sourcing process does not hold up. Now, an artificial intelligence layer comes into picture wherein I can actually get information from my community that as an approver, my approvals have been delayed by more than a couple of hours. What it essentially means is they are asking me to condition my behavior in a certain way so that it does not have a negative impact on the business outcome. So that's the beautiful that's the beauty of using artificial intelligence in this kind of use cases, wherein you can leverage artificial intelligence, crunch enormous amount of data, make it useful for every buyer persona, so that for them taking decisions related to sourcing and purchasing could be even simpler.
Okay, so Diana, I think let's move on to forecasting. Now, that's clearly something that's important to you. I think that it's something that you're looking at in terms of maybe, you know, how you can spread this out further and further as well. So what are the factors that are influencing how you're doing your forecasting and how you shape what information you get in the future?
So again, these kinds of analysis that we were talking about and what everybody mentioned is really like looking back at the years before, what is the trend. So we look at the trend, we look at how the data has been moving, how our information has been changing, and what are the factors that are impacting this the changes. And this enabled us in some of the categories. I can quote, for example, media. How the world is changing and moving. It helped us actually decide on where we're going to spend the money, how we're going to split it between digital and TV, and how this, and what happened during COVID, how this affected our the way we buy and how we're going to buy in the future. So it's really looking at trends, at the market information, what are the criteria that are influencing any decision that we're taking, and we take it from that point onwards.
We're starting to get quite a few questions coming in, so we will turn to those in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Before we do, Andrew, do you, possibly contentious question, do you share data with your suppliers, and are there cases where doing so could help with decision making, which would have a beneficial would be beneficial to your business?
We do share information and data with suppliers, not as much as they'd like, I'm pretty sure of that. But yeah, we do, and I think in this day and age, you need to, as Diana mentioned, from a forecasting perspective, that's obviously critically important to sort of give the suppliers a heads up and a bit of guidance. But from our side, it's not just a sort of constant data feed that we give back to suppliers, but we have ways of giving them feedback on their performance. We also ask for performance from our suppliers back on us as well, so like a 360 appraisal, so we can improve as well. My colleague Arun, who's talking a bit later on in the day, has some fantastic supply chain initiatives that they operate with regards to sort of freight benchmarking, lead times, all of that, which is, again, they're feeding that back to suppliers to help them improve. And in some ways kind of playing off the suppliers against each other as well to drive performance. But if we see two suppliers from the same location and we're tracking the lead times and the freight costs and everything, we can feed that back to the vendor base and help them to improve. And ultimately that drives speed, it drives price. So again, that has a huge knock-on impact within our organization.
Fride, what about from the flip side of that? Do you see, from your side, are different organizations looking at how they can maybe even just join up associated data?
I think so. So when it comes to maybe associating different information, all the different stakeholders play a huge role. Now, when it comes to joining the data, we would want to maybe join the data coming in from suppliers. We would want to also maybe look at some of the other peers. So what it does to us is it actually gives us a platform wherein we can churn that data into more intelligent insights. For example, as Andrew pointed out, that when it comes to suppliers, you would want to pass on information which is related to their performance. But at the same time, you would also want to have some kind of a development index created with those particular supplier performances. Similarly, when it comes to some of the other peer groups who voluntarily come in for maybe a particular category benchmarking, we would want to actually get all those intelligence collated to one particular platform wherein you could look at maybe when it comes to best in class, if it's a particular category, are we buying it beyond that particular benchmark price, or are we within our cost control? So that's the beauty of maybe bringing all the different information from the peer group as well as the supplier data into one platform from where we can actually take better decisions.
Sorry, Andrew, I'm just going to turn back to you very quickly, because based on what Hriday has just said, now in the telecoms, obviously you have so many different types of equipment. It's quite fast moving. Is that something you're doing where you're looking at kind of real-time data price or real-time prices using your data and adjusting plans where you have certain products for instance, in retail stores, etc., making sure they're available at different times? Do you do that?
Yeah, so I mean, the pricing is one, and then availability is another. So pricing, I think, from a market perspective, we have our finger on the pulse. You know, we're lucky enough as a group with sort of 21 different operating countries that we're constantly running RFP events. So in some cases, you might have telecoms organizations who are a bit smaller, who might run a network modernization, just as an example. They might run that type of RFP every 5 years, whereas we're running one every 6 months or so. So we've constantly got a refresh of our prices, but we're also looking externally at data points in the market as well, and combining them with our own historical data points to try and sort of guide us in terms of what our price curve looks like. So all the time in the future, we can see where on our curve we're expecting the price to be, and then building in additional data points with regards to suppliers, market dynamics, etc., which will also give us an indication of where a price should lie. And in terms of the actual sort of availability, again, from the supply chain side, we're very focused on that in terms of what's in our warehouse, when do we need products, and making sure that we build all of that sort of lead time element in to make sure that we're not out of stock in any case whatsoever.
Okay, Jason and Suha, I'm going to ask you a question, and obviously I'd like just slightly different perspectives. Do you find that there is a lot of silos in companies where they're trying to make decisions, but they just haven't joined up their data? Are they aware, and what are they doing to try and unlock those silos so that they do become more streamlined? Jason, I'll start with you.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not just the data that's siloed; it's the processes as well. And I think there's lots of different organisations who have tackled this, who have tried to move forward on it. But how we bring that data together, those decisions together, so that it is used collaboratively and is used throughout the organisation is kind of a key, from our perspective, a key thing that you would want to try and do. So forecasting is a really good example, where you have a supply chain forecasting, and then you have a procurement team forecasting, and then you have a marketing team forecasting. All different elements of the same process, but they all have different methodologies of doing it. So you have the siloed data, you have the siloed processes, and you have the siloed ways of working as well, and they all accumulate to provide a kind of wide range of outputs for different organizations. A really good example of that would be how you calculate gross margin, for instance, for an event. How you calculate that gross margin may be reliant on multiple different factors, which should be calculated by different teams in different ways, and therefore how you forecast it and what the actual result in it can come in multiple different answers. So how we help organizations bring that consistency together, so that people are using common data, common methods, common analytics at scale. And back to this point of AI, a really good example of that we use in SaaS is forecast value add, where where you're focusing more on exception management rather than data gathering and crunching. And we have the ability to use AI to assess the value that a planner has in adjusting a forecast. And that's quite an important tool, where you can say, well, actually that data, that knowledge didn't exist before, or we can use the data that exists in different siloed parts of the organization to bring that together and also measure that impact. So there's lots of different ways of slicing and dicing this, but for me it is data, process, and consistency.
Okay, Suha?
So of course I agree 100% with Jason, and the one thing that I want to add is that the mindset is what makes all the difference. Unfortunately, until today, we do meet organizations that believe that a role of procurement is only to source suppliers and complete a fair, successful bid. While the industry has really transformed, and we have learned the hard way that supply chain disruption can impact the business as a whole. So the strategy has to be on an organizational level, and it has to ensure that all the departments are connected to each other and they're benefiting from the information that they're working with on day-to-day basis. So the old way of working using manual processes really needs to end. It's time consuming, it's ineffective. It definitely using the old way or the manual way, definitely we lose a lot of valuable information in the middle, whether it's buried in different Excel sheets or documents or standalone internal systems that are not speaking to each other. So it is something that needs to be taken care of by the higher management on a full organizational level so that the whole organization benefits out of it.
I'm going to turn to audience questions because we have quite a few coming in. I'll start with a question here, which is possibly for Andrew and maybe Diana, but please, if you think it's for you, do leap in. What are the impacts of predictive analytics in big data for procurement on category modeling and forecasting?
I can have a stab at this. Yeah, massive, absolutely massive. I mean, big data alone, if you take the two separately, big data and predictive analytics, from a category modeling perspective, if you take something like, take an IT category, sourcing laptops or desktops, the big data analytics that we're now able to tap into means that you can access price points from all over the world, and in real time as well. So you can scan the web and look at everything from sort of Amazon to eBay, and bring all of those data points into a big data platform. And you can obviously over time you can analyze that. You can use predictive analytics to understand where your price points are going to end up in the future, and use that to really build a category strategy. So for me, big data is an absolute massive impact, not just on modeling of category strategies, but for procurement and as a whole. It's a huge area which is going to have major impact over the years. It's only going to get better.
Okay.
Could I add to that, if possible? There's a number of different elements in there as well, but one of the big ones that's worth mentioning is new product forecasting. So as a category where you're designing and looking to take new products to market, it can be quite difficult to assess how that product is going to perform, and therefore how do you forecast effectively? How do you ensure that that forecast goes through to your suppliers, and that you get a decent cost price on commodities and materials? So new product forecast is a really good example where you can use that big data, AI and machine learning to assess how that product is going to perform based on attributable factors. So it has X, Y, Z attributes which behave like this product over here, where I have a very strong history on it. So we can bring those things together at scale to help that category forecast. And the other side of that as well, Andrew mentioned on price, is you can have the ability to model scalable optimization scenarios for your category. understand how is that going to best perform and what stock levels are going to balance against that in terms of elasticity. So there's lots of different analytical applications that can be injected into that category management process quite easily.
Okay, I've got a question here which I think I'm going to ban Jason and Hride for answering, and I think it has to be Diana and Andrew who answer this one, which is very simply, what are your preferred data analytics tools? So Diana, if you'd like to maybe start.
I mean, my preferred data analytics tool, that's a very good question. I mean, we use a lot of tools within Mars. We have Power BI. We actually also, I mean, our agency uses their own analytics tool. I mean, I don't have a preferred tool. I would say it has to be a reliable one. It has to, I mean, the tool has to be providing the right, if you want the right functionalities to provide the right output, because I mean, reports that are easily analyzed, that can, or dashboards that are very clearly providing the right information, I would say. I would not actually mention one tool in particular.
Okay.
For me, I'm actually personally a huge fan of the business intelligence tools. So we use a combination of Microsoft Power BI and Oracle BI. We have an Oracle sort of data warehouse, big data platform where we keep all our data. For me, though, I think probably the software providers don't like it, but the open source platforms that we use, such as R, Python, for the advanced analytics, I think they would be the sort of the standout stuff, because you can really go to town in terms of developing your own tools on that to run sort of advanced analytics.
I've got a question here, which I think is a nice question actually, and I'll open it to the panel. How do you align your data analysis with your company's KPIs and strategy, particularly when we're working in such turbulent times where the environments are just very, very dynamic and things changing all the time?
For me, very simply, I don't think there shouldn't be two siloed strategies. You shouldn't have a general company strategy and then a separate digital strategy. Your digital should be your vehicle and your tools for delivering your strategy. So I think they should naturally be aligned, that your digital or your data strategy should feed off your general strategy.
I second Andrew on this one. I would add, I mean, mainly stakeholder engagement, like ensuring that you have the buy-in of the right stakeholders, so that whatever you're presenting and basing again your decision on is actually aligned across. So when we're talking about, for example, a distributor services category as an example, we have the buy-in of the market director, the CFO, the sales team. So they're all aligned on what we're presenting and how we're going to utilize this data moving forward.
What about from Jason or Hride, your point of view?
Yeah, so Rob, I feel that even from a technology partner's perspective, it's very important that there is a better sync up between the corporate objective as well as the technology providers' way of execution of that particular objective. So in terms of maybe even data, we would want to collect the data, process the data which is needed for the organization to actually drive intelligent decisions. Otherwise, there is a lot of hidden costs when it comes to maybe even processing data, which might not end up into an informed decision of the total enterprise. So from that perspective, it's very important that we evaluate the objectives of the organization before even starting off the entire data structuring as well as the data crunching platform.
We have a question here as a category manager.
Sorry.
Oh, carry on.
Sorry, Rob. Could I just answer that as well? So I think that unification of vision is vitally important. But what I think what is also an important factor of this is how does the strategy and the profitability and health of the business in terms of its P&L, its bottom line, how do the different processes and data points impact those elements. And I think there needs to be an understanding of that, so that your data strategy and your analytics strategy can feed into those relevant channels. So that is top down and bottom up.
Okay. As a category manager, the main challenge I have is not retrieving data, but analyzing it and having an accurate spend for a category. How do AI-enabled solutions help reduce the time for analyzing so that we can make faster decisions? Is that something maybe, Suha, you could take?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, so basically the tools that are out there, they're helping you by reading your own data. So they will read your own spends, your own categories, and will give you analytics for you presented in different ways. So you see your spends are, how are you spending, who are you spending mostly on, which regions are you spending mostly on, and then once you get these analytics out, that's when you start realizing, oh, why am I spending all this money on this specific supplier, for example, or this specific category? How can I look at an opposite or a backup plan for that? So the AI machines or the machine learning is being developed, and every day there's new tools that are coming out. And the whole idea is to see the trend of the data and to understand your own data and how you're presenting it. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for. I want to thank our panelists for their thoughts and their insights, for really delving into just the future of data, how it's changing decision making, and some of the tools that can start to be applied to speed up speed up decision making. And I think it was very interesting hearing how even some of those functions are changing, such as using data scientists coupled with procurement specialists. We'll see you again in about 9 minutes at 12:35 when we move to our live talk on shifts in global supply chains post-COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.